joining. I am going to open up our chat panel. Hopefully everyone is able to see this, posting just a default chat to get us started. What I want to do today, we're obviously going to walk through a presentation. This format, if you've joined us on webinars before, is going to be slightly different. Some of the most recent sessions that we've done have been kind of roundtables with other healthcare marketers from healthcare organizations. Today, I am bringing you guys the top two experts that I can think of when it comes to media planning, benchmarking. Rich and Evan lead our media and strategy teams here at Cardinal, and want to kind of structure this as a way to give you all some tips and tricks to address some of the questions that we hear most frequently this time of year when it comes to setting goals, how to, set expectations, how to plan the budget, how to identify, what we're going to yield from our planned investments going into next year. And then what we're going to do is open it up for Q&A. So hopefully you guys, as we're going through this, think of some questions. If you have a specific goal setting problem that you're up against and we want to just kind of workshop it together with Rich and Evan, put it in the chat. We'll get to it up towards the end of the conversation. And thank you to everyone who's listening who sent some of their questions and concerns in the who sent some of their questions and concerns in the actual registration submission. We have those pulled up today and we'll plan to address those as well. So kicking off the chat, I just posted that to everyone. Chat your questions there and we'll address them as we go. So let's go ahead and dive in. I want to just kind of frame up a little bit more. If you haven't, met Rich or Evan, you haven't heard them speak on our podcast or, had a conversation with Cardinal at any point. Rich is our Senior Vice President of Strategy and Analytics. Rich has been working at Cardinal almost as long as I have. We've been colleagues for going on 9 years now. So I can't think of someone who I've learned more from about media strategy. He spearheads our analytics department, both the, tech stack and actual setup of reporting and of analytics, but also conceptually how we think about data and how we've become a data-centric organization. So Rich is going to be, an important piece of going through some of this exercise. And if you guys do have questions, workshopping those in real time. Evan, let me flip over to Evan's beautiful picture. Evan is our Director of Paid Media Strategy and Operations here at Cardinal. Essentially, if you, at any point have or want to become a client of Cardinal's where we're managing any piece of your media, Evan's in charge of that entire team. So he sets the strategies, based on each client's individual goals and needs, which we're going to talk about today, works with the team on actually fulfilling that, on doing the right things, on keeping up with the engines, how their algorithms work. So we couldn't have a better duo for you guys to hear from today. And Evan, Rich, thank you guys so much for joining us. It's been a while since I've seen your faces on here, so it's nice to have you back. Awesome. So quick agenda. Like I said, this is going to be part presentation, part workshop Q&A. So we're going to go through some slides. You guys will receive a recording of this presentation, so don't feel like you have to write it all down. Some takeaways that you guys can think about or maybe help you frame up if you haven't already started your goal planning, help you frame those up for 2023. And in the follow-up email from today's event, we plan to also attach a goal planning worksheet, which I think Evan is going to walk us through at a very high level towards the end, just kind of the anatomy of it. So something that you guys can take away and maybe start filling in some of the pieces based on what we talk about today. So we'll get into all of that, goal planning challenges, how goals guide strategy, how we then measure the impact of the media plan against those goals, and then what some real goals and goal questions are that you guys have submitted. So what are goals and why, do we even care about them? Evan and I were just kind of chatting before this, getting ourselves in the mindset of having this conversation. And, goals mean a lot of things to different people. And ultimately, I want you to think about the business's goals, and then marketing goals, and then maybe your agency or platform specific objectives and KPIs as to how those roll up into the goals, right? So a goal can be as simple as, my revenue target for 2023 is X. It can be as complex as, I have 200 locations. Each one has these nuances, this capacity. Some are at or above, they're on wait list, and others are, operating at 20, 30, 40%. And so I really need to focus in there. And we've got to get, capacity up to Y, right? So goals can look very different, but ultimately it's a statement on what is the objective in order for the business to continue to grow. The metrics, as we talked about, are really just the measurement mechanisms to determine how we're making progress towards achieving those goals. So we'll define those a little bit better. And then the target is essentially, the amount or quantity of the KPI, right? What is the target or goal of the metrics that we need to achieve? And then how do we build a media plan or a holistic digital strategy in order to achieve those goals? And to supplement what you all do from an offline marketing perspective, a field marketing perspective, all of those things obviously come into play here. So I am going to get into the presentation section of our discussion today. Evan's going to kick us off with talking about why goal setting is so hard. I mean, obviously you guys attended today because this is a topic of interest, and Evan, more than anyone else at Cardinal, is in the thick of goal setting season, right? It is Q4. Everyone has to submit their budgets for next year. We're spending 90% of our time right now sitting with our clients and really talking about, what it is we need to do for next year. But it's a challenge every year to really sit down and say, do I have the right data? Do I have the right metrics? Do we understand how we roll up to the bigger picture? So goal setting is a complex exercise, and Evan's going to kind of frame up some of the reasons why it is so complex, and hopefully these resonate with you guys. So Evan, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. To start, just kind of echo a bit before we dive into the details here, just to echo a bit of what Lauren was saying, is that this is the season for it, right? We're heading into a new year. It's the best time to align budgets with objectives and what's expected for your business in 2023. The other thing that's probably on all your minds is, the looming potential for a recession, right? So it's extremely important just for general business success, as well as in a time frame like this, that exactly what performance you're getting out of it, and you can make better decisions at the business level as to where and how you allocate budget. The other thing I'll say is that it's a surprising amount of companies that just don't have this information. So this is great to, being able to dive into this detail and start thinking through this process will really help on your end in terms of, getting a leg up on competition and making sure that your efficiency is there for the work that you're doing. To add to that, I would say, while your understanding and your documentation of goals will evolve over time, one of the things that I would recommend is making sure that you can put these data points and goals into easily digestible formats. It's easy we run into clients where they provide giant spreadsheets of information. And so I think for the clarity of both your internal team, as well as any agency or marketing person that you're working with, having these dialed in and drilled into a very concise, easy to digest format is going to be the most for everyone. So with that, let's talk about why goal setting can be difficult, right? So we have a number of things here. One of the first things is a misalignment between marketing and the C-suite. So often people, the marketing will have their own individual objectives, but they aren't as tied into the ultimate business success as they should be. So you all may have experience with this, where in marketing, the objective might be to drive something as simple as traffic or a phone call, right? But that's where it ends, right? So it's a very loose, tenuous connection between what is happening in marketing and ultimately what is important for the business and what makes that marketing a success. Another thing that we run into is multiple brands under one platform or multiple locations. So of course, typically most companies want to have each business or location supported correctly, but they may perform or behave differently. So it can be overwhelming at times when there's a potential for a lot of different goals to be happening. So we'll also talk about the maturation of how you get to goals as well. New locations versus established locations. That's certainly an interesting topic, because performance is typically not expected to be exactly the same as one that has established performance, presence in the community, and current clients or patients. No CRM. This is a big one. This is one of the bigger things that can lead to an inability to kind of clearly see what things are being driven and how that translates to the end of the business. So that's something we always recommend. Of course, there's layers of complexity going all the way up to using Salesforce and super detailed data collection. But even simple versions of a CRM and being able to determine where leads are coming in and how they're being attributed, that's really important. Data silos. We see this from time to time, different groups, different services being broken out, and they're not kind of unified in a way that helps make easy understanding of what the overall business objectives or the location objectives are. Poor marketing integrations and patient management platforms. So this kind of goes into a bit with this same stuff as CRM. But ultimately, this is the holy grail. Marketing integration is, the best marketing integrations are hard to come by, and even huge companies can struggle with this. So, we'll talk more through this as we go, but the thing I think everyone should be prepared for is knowing that you don't have the best integrations and that's on the horizon. That's fine, right? As long as you're working with proxy values or making your best judgment or assessments on goals, that is a meaningful leap forward, but an improvement over not really having meaningful goals. And then finally, lack of visibility into the patient journey. And this ties in as well. It's whether or not the CRM is set up in a way that lets you see the performance that comes in, or its ability to be passed back into a marketing platform. This can be tricky, but again, doing math on the back end, using approximate values and making sure you're measuring things constantly go a long ways here.
All right, Evan, let's talk about goal maturity, right? Because it's, there may be people that are starting at there's different starting points with where organizations may be today, right? Some organizations maybe this is their first budgeting season, and others have been through this time and time again, but are looking to just kind of always have incremental improvement. So what is the right, place to start for goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's kind of what I alluded to before, is that, the first thing I would say is that, a lot of people might start at not having clear goals, right? Or at least a way to translate them well into how that relates to marketing. So I would let everyone here know that it's important to make any step towards goals is in the right direction. So let's talk about a business that has multiple locations. It can seem daunting or overwhelming if you're starting at the no goal point to then say, well, now I have to have goals for each service line and each location and all this. I would argue that there is this progress, right? So we might recommend starting out that you have an overall objective for the business, right? Or for a service line. Add nuance in over time when you're able to, but starting at, if you have 0 goals right now, don't get hung up on multi-location ones. Start by, how are we translating marketing, generally the success of marketing into the business? And then of course you can add nuance from there. So as you can see with, you go from no goals to a kind of a loose one that's increased leads by 50%. And then finally, kind of where you get the actual detail is goals set by location, service line, brand, and of course, ultimately with business revenue.
I think the other thing that I would chime in here and say is the chances are that somebody inside of the organization has some goals.
Yes.
in the marketing team, we may not have goals, but the chances are that the C-suite or the leadership have goals, right? They have a certain amount of revenue that they want to hit. They have a certain amount of expense that they're trying to stay within. And so you can leverage those goals that already exist inside of the organization to be the foundation of the goals that you're trying to drive in the marketing department as to where the goals should be pointed at. Because, and obviously, if you do that, and we'll talk about this further on in the presentation, you're going to get a whole lot more buy-in from C-suite when you get down the road if your goals tie back to those goals that already exist and that are crafted by and championed by the leaders of the organization.
And on this topic, I think before we move on too, I think Rich and I, we worked on a shared client, and it's an extremely successful organization, and it was small when we started, and now it's nationwide. And for many years, we focused on improvement for the system, right? Health of the system, growth of new patients for the system. And that was enough at that point in time, given the size and scale of the marketing team and, the amount of investment that could be made in analytics at that point to improve and increase the majority of the system, right? To focus on things that make the biggest impact for the widest number of locations, the widest set of services. And then, as Evan said, to inch your way into understanding, okay, are there regional nuances, right? Do we have to go as far as location? Maybe we can start with region or market, right? And build that drill down over time. We've seen organizations go through this trajectory, and just starting chipping away at it is, we've seen companies succeed very well in doing that.
Yeah. The last thing I'll add here is that, the biggest thing we see is that there are business goals somewhere, as Rich mentioned, up in the C-suite or in that department. And then there are things happening in your marketing channels, right? And there's almost without fail with a lot of clients we start out with, there's no connection between what is hey, we've got some calls in platform, but then it's a black hole that data goes through in terms of how it outputs for the business. So the biggest thing we can talk about here is starting with that top-down approach. What's important for the business growth, and then back into translating that into what marketing does.
Taking it a step further, once we kind of get to a place where maybe there are some goals, defining and building out that goal and what it really means, right? Kind of the SMART goal approach that we all learned in like business 101 in college, right? But really understanding what it is that needs to be achieved by when, how, whom, helps to understand your team's impact on it, any external partners and how they roll up into the goal as well. So Evan, I know you had some examples of like what a vague goal looks like, and then how we can kind of translate that into something more meaningful.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of what I just touched on, right? Looking at the vague goals, right? We need a $200 cost per lead from digital. Sounds good. But then when you inspect it, why, right? That's the ultimate question. How did we land on the $200 cost per lead from digital? Does that in fact are we certain that if we drive a $200 cost per lead in platform, that in fact is translating correctly on the back end? Same thing with, patient growth year over year, right? We need 5% patient growth year over year. Well, the best way to do that would be to translate that into hard numbers, right? What are we getting now? And how much more do we need then in hard numbers to progress year over year? And then finally, reduce cost per acquisition. This is similar, right? Do we in fact know that CPA that we're talking about, a reduction of it actually gets us to the target? Because again, it won't always be clear that the action you're driving is correctly giving you the results that you want on the back end. So when we look, of course, this is a big one. When we look at the specific goal, this is very, very specific, but I think helps kind of, get us thinking about the right things here. So translating some of these from the left into, I need to acquire 100 new patients per month from digital at these locations to hit the capacity goals, right? And then of course there's nuance, as we talked about. Some of these locations may be only open a certain time, several days a week, and they might have separate goals, right? Looking at how long, provider reputation and how booked out someone is capacity related to this. And of course, how competitive a market is. The practice converts leads at a lower rate in this market because there's more competition. So we need a different volume of leads. So each of these things, it's a lot to be thrown out here, but each of these things in theory can be broken out and ladder up again to the ultimate business objective, which would, let's say if we talk about needing 100 new patients per month at these certain locations, and that 60 are required at other locations, then we also need to talk about what the ultimate system-wide objective would be.
The thing I would say here too, just to piggyback on this a little bit, is if you give a vague goal, if you've got an agency or if you've got an in-house team, the typical human behavior is to find the easiest way to achieve that goal, right? So if I've got a $200 cost per lead from digital, I'm going to go try and find the cheapest possible leads. Right, that is the typical way that people will try and achieve that goal. Those might not be the right leads. They might not be the most qualified leads. They might not be the leads that turn into new patients and grow the business. But because it's vague, you're still achieving that goal, but you're actually not achieving the end state that you need for the business. On the other side, that specific goal, if you're not specific up front, you tend to end up having to give the people that you're working with these same specifics down the road after the mistake has already been made, which is, why are you spending so much money at these locations that are booked out for the next 2 months? You just spent $10,000 a month there and we can't even see anyone. I know that the front end performance looks good, but we can't even see these patients if we wanted to. And so you really want to have this conversation up front. You do not want to have it on the back end after you've expended $20,000 driving new leads to a practice that just can't take them. So you are going to basically convey this information at some point in the life cycle of a relationship. You may as well do it up front.
Awesome. Let's continue to dive into this. I know as you go through the process, and I think you've spoken, materially about this already, Evan, but anything else to call out on the common mistakes, right? These are for everyone listening, if you're doing this or thinking this, stop now, take a step back, right? Now is the time to course correct. Like anything else you think besides kind of the vague element that is worth shouting out?
I would just say that, it's kind of an order of operations in terms of goal setting. And we'll talk more about this at the end when we go through some of the questionnaire, Lauren. But I tend to think of like three segments, right? The starting point is true financial level goals for the business, not, irrespective of the channel, but what are the actual business revenue goals? Then you can ladder that down into the second section, which would be, what is the primary objective for digital marketing, and then ultimately how does that translate to in-platform metrics? So that's a lot I just threw at you, but I think it's important, that the thought process follows that through, that you can tie back the items the actions you're driving to the benefit they ultimately spit out on the back end. So ambiguous program goals, not being defined by market, location, or service line. I think that's an easy one. If there is a distinction in your business of how things are approached in different markets, or by location, or by service, right? Those need to be written down and discussed, right? Because if we know that you get greater revenue from a certain procedure and half that revenue from a different one, then we have to treat them differently in how we optimize and drive performance. Of course, not measuring the right things. This is a common one that we, we'll talk more, but making sure you're measuring as deep as you can in the conversion cycle. So not measuring the right things would be if you're counting site visits, right? If you're counting, a call to your call center, but you know that there's 5 more steps. They have to be qualified, and then they have to, maybe they have an assessment session with someone. There's all these things that go in between. So if you're measuring too far away from your success point, you can get lost in how performance will go. Of course, not thinking about the market. So how, not only geographic, location market, but your industry, how are competitors doing? How much are they spending? What's their messaging? And then how, of course, what do we expect in terms of performance compared to these other businesses? And then finally, as I touched on before, poor internal alignment and communication of goals. So this is the big one. I think as you arrive and clarify these goals, making them so simple that you could probably explain it to your child or a middle schooler is a great rule of thumb. Make this data accessible, clear, and something that your internal departments and agencies can translate.
Evan, there's a stat that the average reading level, like when you're building a website and producing copy, is 8th grade, and I think that probably applies here too. Like, we're talking 8th grade reading level. Let's communicate goals to that degree, right? At least universally, and then dive deeper into them with the people who need to understand them at a higher level.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So and this actually leads really well into one of the questions we got in the chat, and I think it's a good thing to call out as we're pulling up this slide. So, how do you motivate someone who historically has only given you vague goals, right? Like, what are some of the things, and I think this is what you're going to get into, like reframing the question, challenging them to dive deeper to get you what you need. Maybe even some examples of, look, when I don't have X, I can't do Y, and therefore what I'm producing is something that isn't as impactful as I'd like it to be, right? Helping them to understand that. So that was actually a question we got. This is perfect timing to talk about how to get buy-in from the people that really own the goals.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about making sure you can translate these things. So the highest up starting point, of course, is looking at what is needed from a digital marketing perspective. So something as simple as, let's say business wide, your business needs 100 new patients a month to be on target with the goals and the revenue goals, right? So 100, doesn't matter where they came from, you need 100. That already is providing clarity. So of course, then the questions are, great. Now that we know we need 100 total, how many tend to come in from referrals, traditional, organic, something that is a bit more less actionable and takes more time to improve. So let's say you've got 40 new patients come in on average per month from those channels. That kind of makes it clarifies it for you. Then in theory, digital marketing needs to provide 60 new patients. So we're already marching in the right direction to provide that clarity, and that especially helps with budget setting. Right now you have the ammunition to discuss. Well, we're off target. These are not going to change over time. Organic results are not going to change as quickly. So digital marketing can step in and fill that gap. And then, of course, making sure any other considerations, getting to the point, the absolute point of what you need to drive, and making that very clear. The success only hinges on new patient acquisition. Then let's be clear about that. And how does that change in relation to locations, brands, or service lines?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we ask, we know that, at the top level, we run businesses because to make money, right? And I know in healthcare, there's a lot of other reasons. Helping people is a major reason, but ultimately for the business to grow and thrive, there has to be the money component. And, we oftentimes like to ask in the process of getting to know new clients, like, talk us through your services and help us understand the lifetime value of a patient across each of those, right? Because if there is, a 10X on a patient coming through service line A versus service line B, and you can help your C-suite executive or your board understand that, you need to know that information, because then you're going to determine what keywords you're on, how much you're going to spend advertising or producing creative for certain services, understanding the full funnel of that patient journey, building up better user experiences for people looking for that specific set, right? So if you can boil it back to kind of their goal, if all they can give you is a financial goal, put take what it is that you need from them or why it matters and kind of put it back, against the money, right? Help them just understand how what you do can make or break the ability to hit those numbers. So for the panel or the attendee who asked that question, hopefully that helps give you a couple, starting points on how to think about it. All right. So talking about, those are some fundamentals of goal setting, but how do we really tie the performance and what we're going to stand up and how we're going to build the strategy and the measurement of it to those KPIs? So I know, Rich, you're going to kind of kick us off here. There was a question that I think we should address as we get into measurement, and I know it's going to come up, but one of the attendees asked, do you have any insight on CRM solutions that maybe aren't Salesforce in terms of cost and time to stand up, but that can maybe help someone get the job done or start to inch their way towards the insights needed? And then obviously, it's a tech stack is an evolution over time, but I know you work a lot with clients on their CRM. Any names you might toss out there for their research?
Yeah, it's such a hard question because it really depends on what you want to do with the CRM, right? And CRMs have different skills, different feature sets. And so obviously Salesforce is the one that tends to get thrown out because it's the biggest, it has the most features, it has its own sort of healthcare specific deployment, but obviously with that comes the most expense. So if you just want to have a CRM layer for tracking the leads that come in and tracking those outcomes to leads, I think there is a number of good options out there. I would push people, if measurement is the most important thing, I would push people towards sort of off-the-shelf, common, larger name CRMs, because they tend to have better integration solutions. They tend to have integration solutions that are easier to execute. The more custom you get, the more difficult it is to tie systems into those platforms. Not that it's impossible, but it is more difficult. So, if you just want a basic contact tracking solution, something like HubSpot is more than capable of doing that. We have clients who use Zoho, but Pipedrive, Sugar. There's a number of CRMs that are relatively low cost, depending on how you utilize them, that can serve that fundamental function of tracking what's happening to patients, and then tying that back to the marketing efforts that you've deployed.
And if you want to get really fancy, Rich likes to build solutions that look like a CRM for tracking all the time. So I think it's your side passion, Rich.
Yeah, exactly.
CPR plus spreadsheet plus two-way text solution. We can make it happen.
DM me if you want Richie's CRM for sure.
Technical support 0. Love it. All right, let's dive into this. I know we've got a lot still to cover, and I obviously want to make sure we get to all the questions too. So let's talk into kind of the measurement piece of goal setting.
Yeah, so let's take back to Evan's example of maybe you've done all this hard work, you've got your goals, you're like, great, digital marketing needs to drive 60 new patients a month. I'm giving this clarity to my agency. And then you get your monthly report the next month and it looks something like this. And these are insights that we've all read and we've all written in our past, I'm sure. But at location ABC, we drove 35 conversions at a CPA of 150. This equated to a 7% improvement in conversion volume, et cetera, et cetera. So when you really start to think about this statement, how does it correlate to your goal of wanting to drive 60 new patients a month? And so, if we break this down on the next slide here, it really doesn't tell you anything that you need to know. So maybe location ABC needs to drive 15 of those 60 new patients. And so unless you know that 35 digital conversions equates to 15 new patients and you have a certain level of certainty around that, this really doesn't tell you whether you've met those goals or not, right? And so some of the problems here are, what were the types of conversions that were driven? Every account that we see, every Google Ads account is configured slightly differently. Some have phone calls, some have calls from ads, some have click to calls, some have landing page views, you name it. So just talking about conversions in that generic sense is not that helpful. And then the biggest question is, of those conversions that were driven, especially if you have multiple conversion types that probably turn into appointments at different rates, how many of them actually became appointments, and how many of those were new patient appointments? I'm sure a lot of you guys book existing patient appointments over the phone, follow-ups, etc. But that's probably not the goal of your digital marketing team. Your digital marketing team is probably out there hunting new patients. So then it's like, were the 35 conversions enough to meet capacity goals? Did those 35 conversions essentially equate to the 15 patients that you needed? And then has media, again, essentially driven its share of leads, those 15 patients, to hit your forecast? So from that insight alone, you really cannot tell any of these things. And what you want to start getting to is a communication with your agency around the activity that you need, which is the patients, not just the conversions and the CPA. I kind of touched on this already, but conversions should equal leads. I would definitely encourage you guys to go into your Google Ads account or into your Facebook Ads account and just get a refresher on exactly what you're tracking, because we do see some horror stories when new clients come to us. They're tracking anything and everything under the sun, and their agency is just presenting it as a conversion, and the CPA looks great, and they have no idea why, the CPA is going down and down and down, the conversion is going up and up and up, but their bottom line is not growing. And the truth is, it's because they're tracking the most tenuous things. And especially nowadays with algorithmic learning and with Google, they're training the algorithm to just go chase stuff that really isn't converting into new patients, really isn't growing the bottom line. So I definitely say, go check that.
My favorite one is usually the local action directions, right? For businesses that you have to have an appointment to go book, and then people are just using Google on their phone to figure out how to get there for that appointment, right? And then you start optimizing towards that, or local actions, website visits, where it's just a click to your website, right? And then you're optimizing towards people coming through Google to click to your website. So this is super important. And I think we'll get more into this, but the distinction as well between what you are tracking as the KPI and business objective and what you optimize against can be different, right? And I think we'll get into understanding the nuances between those things. So yes, it may look scary, but dive in, with your team, your internal team, your contractor, your agency, to understand, okay, I see all of these things are set up. Which ones do we care about? Should we care about? Which ones are you actually optimizing towards? Which ones are you reporting on? So, that is, I think, exercise number one. It's essentially, in any audit we've ever done, it's the first panel I open up when I get a new AdWords account is the conversion panel.
And then, so once you've cleaned up your conversions and you know that you're now actually tracking all the right things, not every conversion, even the ones that are correct, are created equal, right? So it might be completely correct to have calls from ads and to have calls from the website and to have online appointments and to have form submissions. They may all be valid ways for new patients to contact you and book an appointment. But the likelihood is that some of those conversion actions are going to convert into new patients at a much higher rate than others. And so the other classic thing that we see is every conversion inside the account is weighted equally and valued equally. And so again, that algorithm thinks that a phone call from an ad extension or a form submission is worth as much as maybe, a call from the website that was 5 minutes long, etc. So one of the exercises, the next exercise to do, is to really understand, if someone comes in from this conversion action in my account, what is their propensity to become a new patient appointment? And it doesn't have to be an exact science, right? There's a ton of variables. So if you're a multi-location, it may vary by each location, but you may be using the same conversion action. But it's just a rough ballpark. So you can say, as in this example here, we've got 2 conversion actions. 85% of call box appointments become patients. So therefore we can value that at $2,125 because, the patient lifetime value is $2,500, and 45% of form submissions become patients. So that value is almost half of the call box appointment, because the propensity of that person through a form submission to actually end up becoming a patient is much lower. That way you're telling Google or Facebook or whoever, if you're using maximize revenue in your bidding strategy, go get me more calls, okay? Or at least pay you. I'm giving you license to pay more for calls because they're worth more for me in revenue. So already you guys can see, hopefully, how by making these adjustments, we're chasing revenue. We're chasing bottom line revenue growth versus just chasing a CPA or a conversion. You're actually trying to point the algorithm and point these tactics at driving that incremental revenue growth that is ultimately going to help you hit your goals and positively impact the business.
Yeah, and just to add something, just to what Rich mentioned earlier when we were talking about, when someone says, "Hey, we've got more conversions and a lower CPA," and it sounds great up front, but what often happens when you look at this data here is that in fact we've just driven a lot more forms, right? So yeah, the CPA looks great, but the quality of the actions you're driving is worse. So therefore, you're not the back end revenue is not experiencing growth like the front end performance.
Okay, so the ultimate goal would be to track downstream activity. And Lauren has also already mentioned my jerry-rigged lead center CRM solution for doing this. There are solutions out on the market. We have a sort of homegrown solution, and there are a number of different ways of doing this. But if you have a CRM, or even if you have an EHR PMS that you can enrich and add data to, i.e. sourcing information, then I would highly recommend that you guys look into a way that, what would be required in order to do that. And we do these projects for some of our clients. We're doing it for one right now in the behavioral health space who uses Athena Health, where we are sending information from the phone system and from their online booking flow about where those leads, where those appointments originated from. And we're sending that data into Athena Health so that they can say, okay, yep, that those leads that you drove through digital, they became patient, they turned up to their appointment, they became a patient, they started their treatment plan, their revenue that they've accrued with us is X. And then we can pass that information back to the marketing platforms and say, hey, Google, you drove this new patient on this date from this keyword, they clicked on this ad, and then they became a patient, and the revenue that they generated was X. And then Google, we can either directionally kind of optimize there and say, okay, in the month of November, Google drove 25 patients worth X. And we saw that most of them came through phone calls and a couple of them came through the online appointment booker. Or if you're getting enough, we can actually optimize towards them and tell the algorithm to go chase those conversions, those new patient conversions. And so the algorithm is then understanding, which keywords drive people who then become patients, not just who become leads. And so obviously, if you can point it at that, you've got that quality layer already baked in. There's no ambiguity around, these quality leads. You've got the quality layer and the quantity layer that you're then able to optimize towards.
Yeah, quickly hop in. I saw a question come in about offline conversions. Just to clarify, that there's obvious stuff that happens in a marketing platform, right? Like someone submits a lead or they make a phone call, right? That's easy to count. But typically, especially with healthcare, there's many more steps in between ultimately a sale, right? Someone may book an appointment, they schedule an appointment to chat with someone. But they don't ultimately convert until later when the sales team talks with them, right? Those would be what we consider offline conversions that are actions that kind of take place, not maybe directly associated with their online behavior. And so there's multiple things like that happen, especially in healthcare. An example in education then would be if we get someone to submit a request or they submit an application, well, then later they have to register and then attend courses, right? So there's these other things that happen that ultimately are marching towards the ultimate goal, which is generating revenue that aren't directly visible in platform.
I mean, Evan, another example is, a healthcare, provider search where an assessment is required, right? So an assessment is required to determine if they're a good fit for the organization, if their needs match the services that you provide. That would be kind of the step, right? The digital then drives the assessment request, but then the conversion of someone from an assessment to an actual patient on a treatment plan is that offline element that, we need tracked from your systems back into and adding that back into the engines to know what happened, because we can't see that, we can't see it in a digital capacity.
Yeah.
So,
The other information that you get when you start tying into CRMs or EHRs is those that don't make it, right? So those who become patients and achieve the outcome that you want is highly, highly valuable. The other thing that's incredibly valuable, especially if you're tracking multiple patient statuses or lead statuses, is understanding why they're not making it to the goal that you want them to make it to, right? Like, are they failing at the verification of benefits? Do they have Medicaid and you guys don't accept Medicaid? Are they not in the demographic of patient that you serve, right? Maybe you're pediatrics and they're adult, or maybe they need diagnostics and you guys don't do diagnostics, or maybe they need detox and you don't do detox, right? So understanding the kind of leads that are coming from digital and why they're falling out is almost as valuable as understanding what is going all the way through to a patient. So all of a sudden you've got all of this extra detail and context that you can optimize to. I know we need to speed up a little bit here. So kind of questions to ask yourself, right? Like, are you able to track the lead outcome? Like, do you guys have the systems in place? Do you have the tech in place? Are you able to enrich your patient management system, your CRM? Enrichment is really the key. If you can send where that lead came from into your CRM or your PMS or your EHR when that lead occurs, that is 100% the easiest way to understand what is driving that patient. It's much, much harder to do matchbacks. It's possible, but it gets real messy. Oftentimes you have a business where a patient will call you 57 times. And so it's like, then I have to try and figure out which was the first call and where that call originated from. So you don't really want to do the matchback piece. It's much easier if you can just enrich the record when that person becomes a patient. The other thing that we didn't really talk about is, there's now this rise of advanced call tracking solutions that will use natural language processing to listen to all the calls in real time and determine if that call was a new patient appointment call. And again, those solutions have cool stuff that will tell you if it wasn't booked, why wasn't it booked, right? And again, so you get that rich context about the leads that you're driving and how qualified they are. I think we can skip on from here. Evan kind of mentioned this already. If you don't have all this amazing tech set up, what you can probably do is some back of the napkin math to at least figure out some proxies to overcome data gaps. So again, on that slide where we were talking about 45% of form submissions become booked appointments, 85% of calls, you guys can probably figure that out from a call log, a form log, and then your patient records. You can do kind of a match back and say, okay, John Smith came through a form submission, so-and-so came through a form submission, go through the list. And then you're like, okay, of all the forms that we got, 45% of them became new patients. Of all the calls that we got, 85%. Great. So now I know that a call is worth twice as much as a form. This at least is way better than, again, not doing anything and just valuing all conversions the same.
So I want to move into kind of putting this into action, and I may skip around a little bit of this. Like I said, we're going to share this out with you all. So the content that we maybe, glossed over in for the sake of time, you guys will have a chance to digest in more detail. And then I want to get to some questions. So what matters most to the C-suite, I think we've talked about, right? Some clear questions to start asking yourself. I'll leave these with you all when we send this out, so you can start saying, do I know the answers to these questions? And if I don't, I probably need to go and seek that information. So a really good starting point. Forecasting. I think forecasting and benchmarks is definitely something we get asked. I mean, I work in the new partnership side here at Cardinal, and probably the number one thing is, well, what's good, right? What's the benchmark? What's everyone else doing? How do I know if it's good enough? Can you tell me what I'm going to yield if I give you a budget of X? And I think it's a very complex ask, and an even more complex answer that you'll get from me if you ever ask me that question, or Rich or Evan that question. Rich, I'll let you speak briefly on forecasting, because I think it is a very it's a very frequently asked question that can be extremely beneficial and also guide you down the completely wrong path.
Yeah, I think the key to forecasting is that, especially if you've never run media before, or if you've never run media in the market before, it's somewhat of a best guess, and trying to look at benchmarks or maybe you work with an agency that has a client that's in the same space, and so you just lean on that agency to say, well, what's so and so doing? What's their performance look like? Let's use their averages. Obviously the markets you're in, the brand equity that you have, the patient experience that you have, the value props, the true differentiation, all these things are going to impact how well you perform. And so it's very difficult to derive what your performance is going to be by looking at someone else, or even looking at the aggregate of the category. So I think typically what you want to do is sometimes you have to draw a line in the sand and just say, I'm going to go to market with this budget. We'll see what we can yield in the first couple of months, create our own benchmarks, and then you're actively seeking to improve on those benchmarks month over month over month, because your agency should be testing different things, honing different parts of the account, reducing wasted spend, doing all the right things that you would expect to see performance increases.
I usually say like the first 90 at a minimum that's the time in which to create that new benchmark, and to build a benchmark off of maybe historical performance that you didn't believe to be fully reliable. Maybe the keyword mix was wrong. Maybe the targeting was significantly wider than the area that you actually serve. So then to start to use that data and call that a benchmark and try to perform against it, when in reality it's based in information or targeting or settings that weren't even the right ones to begin with. That's where you kind of get into a snowball effect of unrealistic expectations and creating budgets and plans around numbers that really aren't accurate. So if you have the tolerance, whenever you're doing a reset and taking a look at things, to create your own benchmarks and build in the time to do that, I would highly recommend. We've got more information on benchmarks here. I want to get to some questions, because there's been a question or two through the chat that align with some of what you all sent in the registration form. And this meeting is for you guys. I want you to walk away really, kind of with some tips. So let's get to those. Evan, I know we didn't get to go a lot through this questionnaire, but something that we're going to be sending to all of you who attended today, or maybe are listening to this on demand, is just a framework to start figuring out what you know, what you don't know, populating the answers to the important questions, starting with the finances, then getting into the channel specific, and then boiling that down into what do we need to do in order to achieve those. So hopefully you guys will find this helpful. Evan, anything specific you want to call out here other than kind of just the framework of it?
I'll just add this. This framework is a great thing to for a thought starter here, and it's some common questions that should be answered. The main thing I'll leave with this concept is that really you ultimately will want a map drawn from business objectives all the way down to what that means for what the actions that are happening in platform. So if you can just chart it and do the math all the way through, that puts you at a great advantage here. And I'll tell you that if you don't have this understanding, it's easy. We often see people hop from agency to agency because it's not working out. But in reality, these things haven't been aligned. So ultimately, I can't recommend this process enough, and will arm you to drive better performance and find and correctly validate how your agency is working for you.
Absolutely. Okay, so some questions, and I think this aligns with one that came through on the Q&A as well. The way that this one is specifically worded, for an early stage MSO, master services organization, or maybe a startup, or someone who's just starting to see patients for the first time, right? How do you how do you figure out where to start, right? When you don't have a lot of historical data, maybe you haven't even seen a patient through the door yet. You don't understand the proxy nuances of how things are going to convert and how they're going to translate. What is an appropriate goal to set for an organization like that? Or how would you guys think about it? Or how have you seen your clients think about that over the years? And Rich, I'll start with you, because I know you and I have worked on similar problems, and then I know Evan has some thoughts here too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, not to repeat myself, but it kind of ties a little bit back to what we were just talking about, right? Which is forecasts are valuable up until a point, and especially if you haven't even nailed on everything yet, and maybe you are in sort of the beta phase of a number of different experiential things on the website. Maybe you're launching new ways that people can digitally reach out, become a lead, become a patient, and you're still honing those things. You should expect, if you're an early stage company in these regards, that your performance should change radically in the first 6 months, right? As you start to really hone these things in. I do think, you have to operate off the information that is available to you. So, we can look at light companies to get at least some sort of an inkling of what performance will be like. We can look at, how competitive the market is that they're in, what the total addressable market size is. So is there a lot of demand out there? Can we easily capture it? We can look at how competitive we think the business is going to be versus the competitive set in the places that it's advertising, to say, yeah, we should be able to stand out here. We're offering a better service. We should do well. And from there, we can, from all these factors, we can say, well, we think based on this information, if you spend, you could spend $100,000 in this market, you may get like a 3% conversion rate, and your CPA would be X, right? So that would be ultimately how we would have to sit down and do it. I would just, definitely do not take these early numbers as gospel, right? They are going to be refined in time as data starts to flow in. And we are, you're going to get much more accurate at forecasting out the next month once you've got a month's worth of data, and then the next month once you've got that month's worth of data in the hopper, et cetera, et cetera. So the front end metrics would be relatively straightforward, right? CPCs, click-through rates, those you may have some level of certainty with. It's going to be more conversion rates, cost per acquisition, and those things are going to be a little trickier to get to.
And Rich, I'll say too, I know we're going to be at time, so we're not going to get to all the questions that we wanted to, but, I think in these early stages, communication, failing fast, if there is a fail in any, if something isn't working, identifying that quickly. We've had clients where, they've hired, let's say, 3 NPs to see, who have a capacity of X, right? And, we look at the addressable market, but we really get in there. And from a competitive perspective, it's harder than we thought. The value propositions aren't quite resonating as strongly as we thought they would. And the conversations 2 weeks in on, this is what we're seeing, this is what we think we can yield. It's going to be a slower ramp up to keep that staff busy, right? So that from a business perspective, you can make the appropriate decisions on how how you plan to grow, what your staffing needs to look like. I mean, I know that the early stage, I think, is more about the rapid communication and identification of what is and isn't working. Let's get to one more question for anyone who's still hanging on. I know some people are going to have to drop, and then what we'll do is we will, we can address any additional questions that y'all have via email. I am always available via LinkedIn. My email is at the end of this presentation that will be going out. So I don't want to leave you guys hanging. If you have some real specific questions that you want us to work through, we're happy to do those after the fact. Rich, I will, kind of leave us on a question. And maybe this is, let me get to one that I think is more universal. Let's talk about this one, because I think as we face what is sure to be some level of economic uncertainty going into next year, a lot of organizations are thinking about, efficiency of the spend, right? And maybe there's not enough budget to go around to support every practice, or maybe certain practices tend to have higher referral rates or a stronger brand presence. The doctor is very well known. They don't need to rely on marketing as much as others. If you've got limited media, and your one option is spread it so thin that it maybe doesn't materially impact any given location, or you have to narrow into just supporting a handful of locations. How would you think about that? What's a problem solving kind of tip for the attendee who submitted this question?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think ultimately it's to utilize the marketing budget to best service the business. And what you want to avoid in a situation like this, and we've seen these situations, candidly, we've seen this in the past, is a client will come to you and say, I'm cutting back my budget, or they may even come to you and say, I'm increasing my budget. And the money just gets funneled into the most efficient places in the account, right? That is going to be the natural tendency, where you are not tying back to business objectives further down the funnel. Is, let me just go find where I can drive the cheapest leads and the most leads. And so you've really got to make sure that you're saying, this is where that specific goal that we covered off in phase 1 is so important, which is, I need patients at these practices this month because my capacity is low and I need to fill them. And that might not mean that likely will not mean the cheapest, most efficient CPA in the account. It will likely mean that maybe instead of $150 CPA, it's a $200 CPA, but that's fine because you're driving the patients where the patients are needed. And, you've got overheads for those practices. You're paying provider salaries, you're paying admin salaries. So the revenue has to be associated with that part of the business unit. So it's definitely better to have the budget be dictated by the business need than by where the efficiencies lie in the account. And that will be the default position if you do not give clear and concise goals to your agency partner. They will go and spend it where it's easy to spend.
Thank you guys so much for joining. I just posted my email in the chat for everyone who's still hanging on that, had more questions, wanted to hear more from us. Please reach out to me. I can be a resource to help you work through those problems. You're going to receive some materials from us via email over the next couple of days, the presentation, a link to the recording, and that worksheet. So keep an eye out, and we hope to hear from you all soon and see you. We're taking a break in December, but we hope to be back early January with our next webinar. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Evan. See you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.